The fiercest takeover battle of 2021 took place in a sector that hadn't seen a major deal in over 20 years, the railroad industry. And just like in the board game Monopoly, it immediately became clear why owning more railroads is such an attractive prospect. The saga began in March when Canadian Pacific agreed to buy smaller rival Kansas City Southern for $28.9 billion, including debt. The transaction would allow Canadian Pacific to form a 20,000-mile network that stretched across North America to create the first US-Mexico-Canada railroad. But Canadian National, a larger rival to the two smallest players of the so-called Class 1 rail operators in the region, had other plans. In April, it gatecrashed Canadian Pacific's bid with a $34 billion offer to buy Kansas City Southern. By May, it had convinced the board of the US company to back its offer. But all was not well for Canadian National behind the scenes. Trouble emerged soon after when one of its major shareholders, the UK activist investor Christopher Hahn of TCI, warned it to drop its plans or face a shareholder revolt. Hahn, who also happened to be a big shareholder in Canadian Pacific, believed US regulators at the Surface Transportation Board would take issue with a voting trust that Canadian National planned to use for its deal. Voting trusts are vehicles that allow a buyer of an asset to immediately pay the shareholders of the target company, even while regulators investigate the merger proposal. During this process, the companies seeking to merge continue to be operated independently. The STB had already told Canadian National that they would take a harder line on their voting trust plans, using a stricter criteria than what they planned to apply to Canadian Pacific. Hahn said if Canadian National pressed ahead and failed, he would seek the immediate resignation of its chief executive. By the end of August, the STB rejected Canadian National's voting trust request, spooking its shareholders. By then, Canadian Pacific had already returned to the table with a fresh $31 billion takeover offer. By mid-September, Kansas City Southern agreed to a deal with Canadian Pacific as it prevailed in the takeover battle. And in October, Canadian National said Chief Executive Jean-Jacques Roust, who failed to clinch the deal, would leave the company within a few months. The saga showed that unlike in Monopoly, he who has the most cash doesn't always win.